The series begins with a girl who becomes a volunteer in the North Korean army and is called Tokyo, although this is not her real name, but she is going through a great financial crisis, so she decides that she will leave the army and go work with her money at night, and this is because his money is much better, and one day her money manager tells her that he wants her to work as a night girl next to the dance. She annoys Tokyo and gets upset with what she has reached, and she refuses the manager's offer, but he forces her and brings 3 guards, so that Tokyo is afraid and agrees, but she surprises them, kills them all, and escapes. Tokyo knows that the police are looking for her, and that she will not be released from prison for the rest of her life, so she decides to leave her home and run away. One day, Tokyo gets tired of being chased by the police and decides to commit suicide. But suddenly a person named Professor blooms for her and convinces her that she is working with him, and he tells her that the amount she will take will compensate her for everything she has seen in her life. So Tokyo agrees and rides with Arabic. The professor takes her to the place where the rest of his team is gathered, and those who number 7 people other than the professor himself, and the professor asks them to name themselves after a country, because no one ever reveals their true identity. This is because they have precedence before that, and we know that the job that the professor says about is that they will rob the largest bank in Korea. Their plan is that they get out of this bank while they have 4 trillion yuan. This will be the currency of Korea, and everyone in the team begins to know himself. And we will see the first one, which is Rio, and whoever is responsible for anything related to electronics and digital devices, and the second person is Moscow, and who specializes in anything related to digging tunnels. And the third one is Denver, and who is the son of Moscow. And this remains a very nervous, emotional young man, and we know that he is also a young fighter, but always support him ahead of his thinking. We also know that the professor used him, at the request of his Moscow father, and the fourth person is Nairobi. Woody is a forgery expert. The 5th and 6th are Helsinki and Oslo, and 2 countries are sisters. And we know that their role is to protect the rest of the gang, and the 7th is Berlin, and this is the person the professor appoints as their leader in the robbery, and the professor keeps training them on the robbery, which he has been planning for years, and every one of them knows the role he will play. 5 months pass from the day the plan comes to implementation, and we go to the Mint, and this is the place they plan to rob, and there we see Young is the director of the home, who is in a romantic relationship with his secretary, Mason, without anyone knowing, and this is because he is a married man and does not want to lose his family. On this day, Mason tells Young that she is pregnant from him. Young becomes angry with her and tells her that no one can know what is between them, and he is not responsible for this child, and it is better for her to download it. Mason is shocked by his treatment of her, and she walks away and leaves him. We see a school trip coming to spend the day at the Mint with their teacher, who is responsible for them until the end of the day. At the same time, the gang goes to implement its plan, and the plan begins to cut off the road for the car that transfers the money to the residents, and those who are protected from a police car are walking in front of it. The gang attack the police car, and they are enough and throw them away, and then he impersonates Berlin police officer character, and he rides next to the driver so that they know how to enter the house, and part of the rest of the gang is hiding in the money cars behind the police car, and at this time it will be Tokyo and Nairobi. They enter the house as if they were regular visitors. As soon as they receive a signal from Berlin that it is the house, they raise their weapons against the bank guards. He arrives in Berlin, and the gang gets out of the car, and they succeed in controlling the bank's security and taking all their weapons. Meanwhile, Rio succeeded in disabling all the bank's cameras, any external means of communication, and the gang succeeds in controlling the hostages and all the employees in the bank, and they lock the bank gate on them. Then Berlin takes the phones from the hostages so that no one tries to call the police, and the gang received all the money in the bank, and then they open the gate to escape, but the police fired at them to surrender and leave the money. The gang quickly retreats and enters the bank again, locking themselves in, and we know that this was part of the plan and that they are doing this so that the police think that they are an ordinary gang coming to steal and walk away. Then We see Berlin distributing to the rest of the hostages the same clothes and masks of the police. And this is because if anything went wrong and the police entered, they would not know the hostages from the gang. You can't hit any of them, and we go to his opinion. Who is making a new electrical connection through the bathroom, so that they know how to talk, and the audio and video with the professor. They are outside the bank. And I give them all the instructions. We go to the investigator and Jane at her house, who is staying with her mother and daughter and spending her day off with them, but she gets a call to cut off her vacation and go quickly to the tent. She resided next to the instrument house so that the police could follow the gang's movements from it, and appointed Jean as the negotiator with the gang in order to try to get the bet out of the bank without any loss in the lives of the hostages. And Jane arrives at the tent, and there she meets the captain, and this remains the leader of a huge squad of special operations, and someone will be the one who paid, and there will be a dispute between one and the other, and this is because he wants to attack the bank with his squad and kill the gang before the issue gets bigger than that. But Jane sees the opposite, and she says that they are in a country that respects human rights, and they must try to negotiate with the first gang. May they reach a solution that satisfies all parties, and the commander of the operation orders that Kalam and Jin are the ones who walk, and that they start negotiating, so that no one blames them after that, and she calls Jane on the phone in the bank to negotiate with the gang leader. He delivers the call quickly to the professor, thus, the police will think that he is with them inside the bank. The professor talks to Wajin, and you learn from him that the number of gang members is 4, so Jane offers him a deal that they take the students out on the school trip in exchange for the police sending them a plane to take them so they can escape from the bank without being arrested, and the professor tells her that he will think and respond to her, and after a few hours, she was surprised when the commander of the operation changed the plan. He orders the Special Operations Task Force to attack the bank, after they knew that the gang consisted of only 4 people. So she objects and tells them that this might be a trap, but the leader insists on his opinion, and he says to log in that we don't need it anymore, and she graduated from the tent while she was fanatical, and she speaks to the person she is related to, and whoever is called Sanham. And they agree that they meet, and you reach Jane on the reincarnated, and we know that their tongue is the same as the professor, and that he had been close to her for a while, so that at this time he would know how she was thinking and intending on what. And we go back to the instrument house, and the forces begin to attack the bank. And they open a small hole, and they enter a camera, and they are shocked when they find that the number of armed individuals is very large. At this time, the gang forces 2 people from inside the bank to come out, but directly, in order for the police to understand that they are disguised as the gang, and that the 2 of them are the bank manager, and this is one of the students of the trip, and what we discover is that she is the daughter of the American ambassador to Korea. Their armor is with the ambassador's daughter, and at this time, Login's phone comes, informing her that they need her because you complete the negotiation, so you quickly return to the tent, and the professor calls Berlin and reassures them that the plan is proceeding exactly as they want, and the professor asks them to start executing the real plan, and we know that all of this was just a hoax with which they laughed at the police, and the real plan is not to steal the money in the bank. No, but the money is printed using the machine that is located in the instrument house. Thus, they will not be thieves. This is because they did not steal anything from anyone, but they print some money, and then they leave the bank exactly as they entered it, and the gang begins to implement the plan, and they force all the hostages, who number about 50, to help them print the money after dividing them into 2 groups in order to print the 4 trillion as soon as possible. The next day, Wajin calls the professor to find out his response to the deal she offered. It was yesterday, but the professor ignores the question and keeps asking her very personal questions in order to try to waste time. Then he closes at length without giving her any response. Jane understands that she is dealing with a smart criminal, and she must focus well. The professor will be reassured that she will not be able to know that he is still the same person that she is. It is linked to him, and this is because he uses a program that changes his voice. And at this time, Moscow and his son Denver start digging a tunnel inside the bank. And we learn later that this is also part of the plan, a tunnel that is not real, but they deceive the police. and that the real tunnel will be responsible for digging. Moscow alone, and Moscow and Denver seek the help of some of the hostages to help them dig the tunnel. Among them will be Young, the bank manager. Young takes advantage of the gang's preoccupation, and he convinces one of the bets he has with him that he will be blinded in his hand, and Asa what the gang is busy in. She treats him. Young will try to find any way, help them call the police, and they carried out the plan. Young sneaks into another room, but Tokyo sees it, and you hand him over to Berlin to punish him, and he orders Berlin to separate the hostages from the north from those from South Korea and tells them that if a hostage from any party does not obey the orders, the whole of the other team will be punished. Thus, they are the ones who remain responsible for each other's lives, and Berlin orders that the daughter of the ambassador be imprisoned in a room alone. This is because she is the most important hostage with them now. After a few hours, Young still insists that he find a way to communicate with the police, but he remains a very cowardly person. And he puts the plan down, but he can't implement it, so Young goes to his beloved Maysoon and laughs at her and tells her that he still loves her and that he is afraid of her and wants to get her out of here, and then he has a smart watch that he hid and he did not accept it. Her hands to the gang when they took the phones from them, and he tells her that this watch is in his office, and he asks her to go and get it so that they can contact the police. Meanwhile, Denver sees them talking. He tells Young that Maysoon is pregnant and tired, and she needs to rest. Denver takes her to the same room as him and leaves her, and then Mason agrees with Anne on a plan, and she will ask that she go to the bathroom, so that Rio, who is watching the cameras, would come and take her to the bathroom, and that's how Mason will be able to sneak into the principal's office, and the plan succeeds, and Mason arrives in hour, and as soon as you turn it on, Denver enters it, and he will bring her food and tell her that she must eat well for the health of the fetus. At this time, a police signal will be reached by the watch, and they know that there is one of the hostages trying to communicate with them, but they meet the clock closed quickly. After a while, Mason goes down to complete a job with the rest of the hostages. But at this time with their age, and he eavesdropped on her call, and he knows that one of the hostages was trying to contact the police. The professor runs quickly and reports to Berlin who he knows, so Berlin collects the bets that they search them one by one, and Berlin finds out that the watch is with Mason, so he orders Denver to take her upstairs and kill her, but he refuses and says that the professor's plan says that none of the bets can die. Denver is upstairs and it appears that he is very hesitant, but in the end he kills her, and everyone in the bank hears the sound of gunfire, and terror begins to spread among the hostages. But after a while, we learn that Denver killed her and that he only hit her leg based on an agreement between him and between her so that he could come to Berlin and see the blood and think that she was dead. But Tokyo does not remain silent unless it knows the real story, and you are happy when you know what Denver did, but at the same time, she fears for him and Mason. And this is because if Berlin knew that he did not kill her, he would kill the three of them. And Tokyo sits alone thinking. Then Denver tells him that Berlin is no longer useful as a leader after he changed the professor's plan, and the two agree that they isolate Berlin from the leadership of the gang, and before they go out, Tokyo damages Mason's wound, but she can't go out and promises Mason that she will try to act and will come back to her again. At this time, the professor receives a call from Eugene's mother, who talks to him on the grounds that he is their age. And she tells him that she is trying to reach Lu Jane to inform her that her ex-husband took her daughter from home, but she can't find it at work. The professor takes advantage of this opportunity. He decides to go to the tent to meet Eugene and tell her about her mother's words, but in fact, he is going to find out what the police intend to do with the gang, and he reaches the professor at the tent, and Login communicates her mother's words. She thanks him and quickly takes him out of the tent, and this is because any stranger enters here, so the professor gets out of the tent, but he still knows that the police were able to penetrate the smart clock and take a video through it, and from this video they were able to determine the identities of Rio and Nairobi, so the professor goes home quickly to inform the gang of who he knew, and then we return again to the gang and Denver and Tokyo begin to vent. Their plan is that they take up arms against Berlin and ask him to give up leadership. Meanwhile, a quarrel breaks out between the gang members themselves. This is because Helsinki and Oslo remain on the side of Berlin and want him to stay. leader. As for Nairobi and Rio, they want Tokyo to take the lead. And at this time, a call comes to them from the professor, who sees their suffocation from the cameras, but he does not know the reason, so Tokyo tells him that Berlin disobeyed his orders. One of the hostages was killed, and the professor is shocked and feels that his plan is starting to fail, and he tells her that the gang from the police was able to determine the identities of Rio and Nairobi. At this point, it gets messy, and all the gang members start fighting each other, and he enters Moscow and collapses when he learns that his son Denver is the one who killed the hostage, and he shouts at the professor. And he says that when he was asked to join the gang, he did not think that his son would get involved in something like this, when the gang is fighting with each other. He leaves Moscow, opens the bank gate, and decides to turn himself in, but Denver, he runs on it and tries to manage his face. The police will see what is happening, but they will be afraid of shooting, so it is good that these are one of the hostages. And Berlin sees what is happening and reassures the professor, saying that he will act. And then Berlin orders a group of hostages to get out of the bank with their holdings, and that's how the police will mess up more, and you won't know exactly who you are hitting, but something happens that is not. That Young is the bank manager, and he is one of the hostages who got out and are trying to escape, so he points the weapon he has towards the real gang members to let him escape, and the police see what is happening and think that Young is one of the gang, and they are afraid that he is robbing the hostages, so they order to shoot him, and the mask falls from Young's face. The police know that she beat up one of the hostages, and that no one is the manager of a house. The coin itself. At this time, Denver confesses to his father that he did not kill Mason or anything, but he hid her because he was afraid of Berlin, and the gang succeeds in controlling the situation again, the hostages, including Young, to the bank. And then the gang learns that Young's injury is serious, and the training that the professor gave them to perform any surgery is not enough. In this case, meanwhile, the police call the professor to check on Young's condition, and Jin offers him to let a medical team enter the bank so that Young can save him, and the professor agrees along, and this is because if Young dies, there will be problems for both parties, not just for the police. Meanwhile, the police put in a new plan, which is that the captain will enter the bank with the doctor, and he will say that the assistant nurse has a new look, in which a camera is installed that records everything that happens inside, sound and image, and in the same at the time when the gang will be busy with the medical team. The special operations team will be disguised in the same clothes as the gang and the same mask as theirs, and will enter the bank through the pipes. Thus, they will be able to control the gang from all sides, and the police begin to implement their plan, and the medical team enters the bank, and the gang searches them well, and they take their mobile phones. At this time, the professor is watching everything from the cameras, and he knows that the person with this doctor is Captain Ockel, and that is because he was there when he entered the tent, and the professor calls Berlin and informs him, so Berlin enters them while they take the bullet out of Young. And he faces the weapon towards the doctor and tells him that he looks tense and that he will not be able to do the operation, and he asks that he is the one who completes the process. He confesses at length and tells them that he is not a doctor and that he is an undercover officer, because he can ensure the safety of the rest of the medical team. Berlin forgives him, but he prefers to watch them the rest of the process. At this time, the professor notices that his glasses are different from the time he saw them. He knows from his opinion that the police can plant any device in the freshness, so the professor understands that the police were trying to watch the gang from inside as a camouflage so that they are trying to break into the bank from a back place, and the whole gang knows what is happening. And they begin to search the bank one by one and look for the place from which the police are trying to enter, and there at the same time, they begin to implement the plan that the professor put in order to use it in the event that the police can break into the bank, and the plan is that the gang and the hostages will change the masks they are wearing, and this is so that if one of the police tries to disguise himself in the clothes and the old mask of the gang, they can. The medical team reveals the operation, and as they leave the bank notices the new situation and understands that the police are still in danger and is running to inform the attack to stop quickly. Indeed, the attack is stopped, and the forces return again to the pipes, to the regret of one of them, whose name is Park, and Whoever decides that he does not hear the words and goes to hide among the hostages. We see the professor hilarious because his plan worked, because he also planted a wiretapping device on the captain's phone via Rio, when he took their mobiles under the pretext of the search. Thus, the professor will be able to know all the police first. A little while later, he notices Berlin that there is a strange movement among the gang members, so he watches them, and he knows that Mason is still alive, and that all of this they were lying on it, and he tells them that they must kill her, and this is because if the hostages knew that they were all this, they would laugh at them, they will stop. Be afraid of them. This will increase their escape attempts, and Berlin raises the gun in the face of Denver, and they force the second time that he kills her, otherwise he will finish it, but Nairobi delivers, she also raises her revolver. But in Berlin, and by forcing him to leave them, they try to dig her quickly before she seriously dies. At this time, Rio begins to take out a bullet for her, and this is because he was a medical student before he left her and joined the gang, and they finally succeed in squeezing Mason, and then they all agree that Berlin is no longer useful as a leader for them. And we return to Login, who collapses from what is happening to her, and they go out of their tongues to relieve her, and they have a relationship. And at night, Asaa, the hostages are not asleep. Park withdraws, goes to the bathroom, and sends a message. To distort it to ask for instructions, he turns on the professor and kills him, and this is because once they get rid of him, the rest of the gang will disperse, and they will be able to kill them in a short time, and the next day in the morning, Tokyo informs the rest of the hostages that Mason is still alive, so that they can go back to the gang and stop disobeying their orders. Indeed, the bet is very happy and they begin their work with enthusiasm. We will go back to the tent again. We see Eugene. After she begins to suspect that the professor is not even in the bank, and it exists outside, but he communicates with the gang and manages the operation, said Chow objects, telling her that he will not disperse the police's efforts, just because there is no basis for truth, and also tells her that Park is looking for the professor, and he will find him and kill him. We go back inside the bank and see the client, Park, who is cooperating with Young, the bank manager, and they decide to attack Denver. And they are enough to confess and say who among them is the real professor, but Denver refuses to say anything, so Young suspects that the professor will remain in Tokyo. This is because no one can break a word for her, and the client is convinced of his words, and he makes a plan. It is that he turns on the alarm bell so that the gang gathers with the hostages in one place. Thus, he will be able to single out and kill her, and really implements the plan. But before he kills Tokyo, he overhears Denver, who will untie himself, and he tells her to inform the professor quickly that there is a policeman who entered the bank and is hiding among the hostages. Park understands that the professor is not even in the bank and that he is not one of them, and begry Park to inform those who knew him. At this time, Wajin was able to access the data of the Arabic that the gang used when they came to the bank a month ago to be examined by the cameras. And she appreciates that she locates this Arabic. And she decides to go check it out, and the professor would have heard all this from Helsinki. That he hadn't got rid of Arabic, as he told him. The professor is terrified because his fingerprints are on it, and he decides to precede the police on the place of the car, which is located in a place designated for old cars. And the professor reaches Arabic, and he uses the materials he has to erase his fingerprints. But before he goes out and leaves the car, he discovers that the police have surrounded the place from all sides. He decides to move quickly in Arabic, and he tries to get rid of it, and you see Eugene the Arab moving in front of her, and you know that the professor is the one in it, and the police preferred to see someone deceiving them in the middle of the tracks that he was going to surrender. The police come down to arrest him, but he moves quickly after that and throws himself in the Arabic fire. Asana, what the police are looking for inside the Arabic bacon. He came out from the other side, and he runs quickly to his house in order to follow the surveillance cameras in the bank, and we return to Tokyo, which knows that Park is the secret agent, and you arrest him. Meanwhile, Berlin succeeded in entangling itself, and he comes to them and kills Park, and he hears the 5 and the beating is the fire, and he informs Jane of everything that happened in her absence. So Jane calls the professor and asks him about hitting the fire, which the professor reassures her and tells her that the bets are all good, but Jane asks him for evidence, which is that he allows her to enter the bank while she has a camera that takes a live photo. She bargains with him and tells him that in this way he will be able to curse all people with his goodwill, and he didn't want any of the victims. The professor agrees to her request. He informs Tokyo that she is preparing the hostages for their upcoming visit. So Tokyo collects all the bets, and you tell them that if someone told the police something you won't leave. We go to Leung, the bank manager, who decides to take advantage of the opportunity to inform Jane of what is happening and tell her about the people and the money that is being printed. Young asks the ambassador's daughter to help him and write a paper telling her about everything that is happening. She is forced to agree and take Jin to the bank, and she will have a journalist with her who will photograph everything, and she asks that she check on the hostages, and Berlin will take out the hostages one by one in order to buy more time and thus follow more money, and it will be a turn, so she will approach her and Jin to make sure that she is good. All that happens and she holds hands without taking care of what is happening, and then she demands that she see the rest of the hostages all at once in order to buy time. And he agrees with Berlin when he finds her insistent, and she takes out the check that she has and assaults the hostages, one by one, to make sure that they are all there, and Park will be among the names in the reveal, and she asks Jane about him and tells them that he is a security guard, and the day the theft began was his first day at work. So Berlin tells her that they don't know him, and you and Jane doubt that Park will be killed, and I want her to take advantage of this to turn public opinion against the gang. Thus, they will win public opinion on their side, after all the mistakes made by the police and the ones that made people stop making fun of them. So Jin goes to Young and asks him about Park, so he tells her that they don't know him. And at this time, she decides that she is speaking, and you say that the gang killed Park yesterday, so you take advantage of what is happening, and she faces her words to the camera. And you tell them that Park was a policeman, and as long as the gang killed him, so they broke the agreement between them when they said that they would not marry anyone, and Jane asks them to compensate for what happened, that they take the school trip students out of the bank with her, but Berlin will be in for a surprise, which is that Park is still living with all the people, including Jane, and at the same time the professor delivers a video to the station, which is only empty. Once again, the police were able to win public opinion in their favor again, and he looked at Berlin for the camera and confronted his words to the people to sympathize with them and tell them that the gang came here to take money, not more, and that if they want to hate someone, they are supposed to hate the police, and this is because she is interested in arresting the gang, even if the presenter's life is to be killed. And Jane gets out of the bank and discovers that the case has been excluded after the public opinion was angry at them, and at this time the gang is celebrating after they won all parties to their side, and at the same time they gained a time when they print more money. And the gang members return to water. There are some others who enter Moscow and tell them that the drilling operation is proceeding successfully and that in a very short time the real escape corridor will be ready. And Nairobi says that within 3 days they will have reached the required amount, which is 4 trillion, and after that they will be able to flee along. We go back to the tent a second time, and Jin will object to excluding Chow, and she tells them that if he walks, she will walk too. So Zhao goes out, thanks her, and tells her that he started to suspect her boyfriend who entered the tent a few days ago, so she gets angry in Jin. And she tells him that she knows him well and that she trusts him very much, and then she goes to him and Jane to meet and they spend the night together. At this time, Jin finds out that part of the paper she wrote is in her home, so she asks Sinhu to go back to the tent. Sinhu arrives at his house, but he is surprised by Captain Aka, who is coming to his house after he begins to suspect him. And the first season of the series ends, and wait for the video of the summary of the second season.